Welcome back to Sip and Talk. It's your host, Joe, here, ready to jump into something fascinating. And of course, I'm joined by my incredible co-host.
And I'm Sunny. You know the drill. Grab your favorite beverage because today we're diving deep into a stack of insights that Micky, our good old friend and YouTube guru, recently sent our way.
Yeah, he dropped off quite a pile.
He did. We're talking about comprehensive notes and reports on the Taiwan Strait, a geopolitical hotbed that's, well, it's far more complex than the headlines often suggest.
That's absolutely right. Our mission today is really to cut through all that noise and get to the heart of the crucial dynamics at play. We'll be focusing specifically on Taiwan's unique, often challenging position, China's clear ambitions, and how the rest of the world, especially, the United States, fits into this intricate puzzle.
It truly is like a high-stakes geopolitical chess game.
Exactly. And we're going to look at it from all angles to give you a clear, nuanced picture. We're delving into everything from intricate military maneuvers and psychological warfare to the very identity of a nation.
Yeah, the identity part is huge.
So let's roll up our sleeves and see what Micky's got for us.
Okay, so the first major idea that jumps out from the analyses we've reviewed is Taiwan's seemingly high probability of being, quote, encircled and unable to respond proactively.
Encircled and unable to respond. Wow.
Yeah, and this isn't just some abstract hypothetical scenario pulled from a distant academic paper. It's a very real and frankly dangerous path that's repeatedly highlighted in various strategic analyses and military simulations. It's a core vulnerability.
Okay, let's really unpack this then. It sounds like Taiwan is caught in a profound strategic bind, almost like a poker game, where one player feels they absolutely cannot make the first move, even when facing an opponent who's consistently upping the ante.
That's a good analogy.
So why is Taiwan perceived as being so passive? Or perhaps more accurately, why is there such a strong, deeply ingrained don't shoot first mentality, even when faced with significant encroachment?
Well, that's a critical question, and the answer is multi-layered. It extends beyond pure military strategy. The notes indicate significant internal pressures at play that contribute to this passive stance. Firstly, there's what's described as a conservative strategic culture, a long-standing, almost institutionalized mindset within Taiwan's defense establishment that prioritizes not stimulating China.
Don't poke the bear.
Pretty much. And this isn't just a tactical choice. It's a deep-seated caution born from decades of living under Beijing's shadow. This mindset, unfortunately, means that military preparations might seriously lack proactive elements or robust, realistic crisis drills that involve preemptive measures. It's like if your fire drill at home was simply stay quiet and hope the fire doesn't notice us instead of having a clear escape route and practicing getting out quickly. That level of strategic caution can be paralyzing.
Wow, that's quite an image. It makes sense in a terrifying sort of way. You don't want to poke the bear, but what happens if the bear is already slowly moving into your living room?
Exactly. And compounding this is significant public opinion divisions within Taiwan itself. Some segments of the population genuinely hold the belief that firing the first shot makes you a war criminal.
Ah, the moral dimension.
Right. It's a powerful moral argument that resonates with the desire for peace, but it can be strategically crippling. Imagine a playground scenario where one kid is clearly being cornered and bullied, but no one wants to throw the first punch, even in self-defense, for fear of being blamed. Adding to this complexity are certain political figures, particularly from the Kuomintang, often referred to as the KMT party.
The KMT, right.
They are seen as very pro-peace, sometimes to the point of being labeled pro-China by their critics.
Yeah.
They frequently question proposed military purchases, especially from the U.S., or even accuse the incumbent government of provocation.
So it makes it hard to get everyone on the same page for defense.
Incredibly difficult. It makes forging a unified national defense front and agreeing on proactive measures a real uphill battle.
So it's not simply a strategic choice based purely on military calculus, but a complex reflection of deep-seated societal anxieties and profound political fault lines. It's almost like a family argument where everyone is scared to raise their voice too much for fear of making things even worse, even if their very home and way of life are at stake. That sounds like an incredibly difficult tightrope to walk for any leadership.
That's a perfect way to put it. And this internal dynamic immediately raises an even broader question. How does the United States, a key player in the region, fit into this whole complex picture? The reports we've been reviewing draw a fascinating and quite stark comparison between the U.S. approach to the Israel-Iran conflict versus the Taiwan-China situation. They are fundamentally operating from two entirely different playbooks.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. With Israel and Iran, the U.S. seems far more ready to get directly involved, like actively intercepting missiles or issuing strong explicit warnings. But then with Taiwan, it's this whole strategic ambiguity thing, where they're not explicitly saying what they would do if China made a move. It's like, with one friend, you're ready to jump into a brawl and protect them at all costs, but with another, you're just standing on the sidelines, watching intently, maybe offering some encouraging words and hoping for the best.
Yeah.
Why is there such a stark difference in approach, especially given the potential global ramifications of a Taiwan conflict?
Well, the distinction is rooted in the perceived scale of risk and the nature of the adversaries. With Israel and Iran, the U.S. has indeed actively supported Israel, even to the point of deploying assets to intercept Iranian missiles. However, there's also a very clear caution to avoid direct, all-out conflict with Iran itself. The policy there is often described as waiting for a red line to be crossed, something like a major attack on U.S. personnel or assets.
Okay.
And then making any retaliation legitimate by international standards. It's like waiting for a bully to truly hit someone before stepping in, to ensure self-defense justification and to avoid being seen as the instigator. The underlying assumption is that Iran, while a regional power, isn't a global superpower, and thus the conflict can be more easily contained and suppressed, limiting its spread to the wider region. It's a calculated, contained response.
But then with China, the stakes feel astronomically higher. It's not just a regional conflict. It feels like move one and the whole world catches fire. Why is it so fundamentally different when China is involved? Is it simply the sheer scale of China's economic and military power, especially as a nuclear-armed state?
Absolutely. The calculus changes dramatically. If the U.S. were to directly intervene militarily in a Taiwan conflict by, say, sending troops to fight on the ground or explicitly defending Taiwan's coastline against an invasion, it would essentially mean declaring war on China.
Which is unthinkable.
Right. That risks a world war-level escalation, a direct confrontation between two nuclear-armed powers with global supply chain implications that would dwarf any previous conflict. Taiwan isn't like Israel. There are no U.S. troops permanently stationed there.
No treaty obligation either, right?
Yeah, exactly. No explicitly inseparable strategic alliance treaty like the U.S.-Israel one that guarantees automatic military intervention. So the U.S. strategy is more about maintaining the status quo, essentially buying time for Taiwan to build its self-defenses, and shaping an international checks and balances environment to deter China, rather than actively escalating by committing to direct military intervention.
So deterrence through ambiguity and arming Taiwan.
It's a strategy of deterring aggression through uncertainty and strengthening Taiwan's own ability to resist, hoping to make any Chinese invasion too costly to attempt. And this strategic ambiguity leads to a significant international law dilemma if we connect this to the bigger picture. If China were to merely encircle Taiwan indefinitely, perhaps through a sustained blockade or continuous aggressive military drills that effectively cut off the island without firing the first shot.
The gray zone stuff.
Precisely. The U.S. faces a complex legal and diplomatic challenge. If they intervene militarily to break such a blockade, they risk being seen as the aggressor, as initiating the actual conflict, because China could simply label its actions as drills or internal affairs.
The justification game again.
Exactly. In that specific insidious gray zone scenario, the U.S. would likely be limited to observation, sanctions, and diplomatic condemnation rather than immediate military action. This really ties their hands and is a key concern highlighted in the analyses.
So if Taiwan is caught in this strategic dilemma of not wanting to shoot first due to internal pressures, and the U.S. can't easily intervene without risking a global conflict or being labeled an aggressor, what's China's preferred playbook here? It sounds like they have a lot of room to maneuver in this complex space. The notes mention something called gray zone warfare and a chilling, boiling frog strategy. What exactly do those terms mean in this critical context?
Well, what's fascinating and deeply concerning here is that China isn't necessarily rushing for a full-scale D-Day-style amphibious invasion as their first or only option.
Okay.
They actually prefer a strategy known as step-by-step, which roughly translates to gradual encroachment.
Gradual encroachment.
Yeah. This involves a range of tactics designed to be below the threshold of formal warfare. Yet they create immense pressure and slowly chip away at Taiwan's sovereignty and resilience without triggering a clear, undeniable act of war. This includes things like continuous, seemingly innocuous activities such as sustained patrols around Taiwan's outer islands, places like Kinmen, Matsu, and Dongyin.
Those really close islands.
Right. Establishing temporary no-fly zones for drills, conducting massive maritime exercises right up against Taiwan's shores, or even deploying civilian fishing boats intermingled with military vessels to obscure their intentions.
Making it hard to know how to react.
Exactly. It makes it harder for Taiwan to respond definitively without being seen as escalatory. These tactics are intentionally designed to not cross a clear, internationally recognized line into an overt act of war, at least in China's framing, but they achieve their strategic objectives all the same. The reports compare it chillingly to Russia's pre-war deployment around Ukraine, daily air incursions, naval fleet circumvention, effectively sealing off areas but labeling it as drills or training exercises. In Taiwan's case, it would leave them unable to move freely, unable to counterattack effectively without appearing to be the aggressor, and ultimately unable to escape the slow squeeze. The pressure builds incrementally.
So it's like someone slowly putting a pot of water on the stove with a frog in it. The frog doesn't realize it's boiling until it's too late because the change in temperature is so gradual and imperceptible from moment to moment.
That's the classic analogy, yes.
And if Taiwan doesn't react decisively to these gray zone tactics, the fear is these outer islands could be gradually cut off, lose supplies, or even be forced to surrender without a single clear shot being fired by Taiwan, simply due to the unbearable pressure.
Exactly.
That's a truly chilling thought, the idea of losing territory without a declared war.
Precisely. And this isn't just theoretical speculation. Military simulations, like those conducted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, in 2023.
Right, got that one.
As well as analyses from the RAND Corporation and Taiwan's own National Defense Institute, consistently point to limited conflict scenarios where these outer islands are targeted first. The dilemma for Taiwan in these simulations is stark. If they retaliate against these gray zone actions, say, by firing warning shots at encroaching civilian vessels accompanied by military ones, China can use that as a clear excuse for full-scale escalation, claiming Taiwan fired the first shot and provoked the conflict.
Damned if you do.
Exactly. But if Taiwan doesn't retaliate, doesn't actively counter these incremental encroachments, those islands could indeed be lost without a fight, slowly boiling, just like that frog. It forces Taiwan into an almost impossible choice between self-preservation and global blame.
That paints a pretty grim picture for Taiwan's defensive posture, stuck between a rock and a hard place with internal divisions, external pressures, and an adversary that prefers slow suffocation to outright invasion. But let's shift our lens now. What about China's perspective? How do they justify these actions, these aggressive maneuvers and territorial claims? Because to the outside world, it often looks like outright aggression, even if it's dressed up as drills or internal affairs.
Right, and that's a key point to understand if we're going to grasp the full complexity here. From China's perspective, their intentions regarding Taiwan are consistently packaged as maintaining national unity and defending territorial integrity. It's not just a political slogan, it's a very deliberate, comprehensive narrative, almost like a meticulously crafted legal brief or a grand historical epic where they are the righteous protagonists reclaiming what is rightfully theirs.
Whole narrative structure.
Definitely. They employ a sophisticated justification toolkit to frame their actions as both legitimate and historically inevitable.
Okay, so what's in this justification toolkit? How do they build this narrative for both their own populace and the international community?
Well, first, they rely heavily on what they call historical legitimacy. They claim Taiwan has belonged to China since ancient times, citing periods of rule by various Chinese dynasties from the Yuan, Ming, and Qing.
Going way back.
Way back. Think of it like someone claiming indisputable ownership of an old family heirloom based on generations of possession, even if it's been living in a separate home and forging its own identity for decades. They also lean heavily on international documents like the Cairo Declaration of 1943 and the Potsdam Proclamation of 1945, asserting that these post-World War II agreements stipulated Taiwan return to China after Japanese colonial rule. President Xi Jinping himself has explicitly stated that Taiwan's return is a victory outcome of WWII, embedding it into a narrative of reclaiming historical glory and righting past wrongs inflicted by foreign powers.
And then there's the infamous anti-secession law, right? I've heard that mentioned a lot as Beijing's legal trump card.
Exactly. The 2005 anti-secession law is a cornerstone of their legal and political framework regarding Taiwan. It explicitly frames Taiwan's independence as a provocation to China's sovereignty.
Provocation.
And, crucially, authorizes the use of non-peaceful means, essentially, force to prevent division. While it's technically a domestic law, it effectively serves as their internal and external legal justification for potential military action.
Providing a legal basis in their eyes.
A supposed legal basis, exactly. It's a preemptive legal maneuver to justify future actions. Beyond these historical and legal claims, there's a powerful nationalistic narrative at play that resonates deeply within China. National rejuvenation.
The Great Rejuvenation.
Right. President Xi Jinping consistently integrates Taiwan's unification into the broader narrative of the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, a vision of China reclaiming its historical prominence and power on the world stage. He emphasizes that unification is a historical inevitability and views any obstruction to this goal as either foreign interference or Taiwan independent separatism. It's framed as the final indispensable piece in China's national destiny.
Making it almost a sacred duty.
Almost, yes. A non-negotiable step toward achieving their vision of global prominence and historical rectification. This makes it an almost sacred mission for Beijing, not just a policy objective.
So if anyone else, like the United States or other democratic nations, tries to help Taiwan or intervene in any way, China immediately spins that as interfering in internal affairs, which then, in their view, legitimizes their own military actions.
Yeah.
It's like, mind your own business, this is a family matter, and you have no right to meddle in our internal affairs. This rhetorical move seems very effective for them.
That's precisely the argument they wield on the international stage. By framing external support for Taiwan as interfering in internal affairs, they attempt to create a narrative where their military actions are not aggression, but rather legitimate defense of sovereignty against foreign powers.
Shifting the blame.
Exactly. It's a very effective rhetorical tool for them, especially with countries sensitive to sovereignty claims, even if many other nations recognize Taiwan's de facto independence and democratic governance. It makes intervention appear illegitimate.
So what does this look like in terms of actual actions? Because it's not just rhetoric and legal justifications, right? They're actually doing concrete things on the ground or in the air or on the sea to back up these claims.
Oh, far from it being just rhetoric. Their actions are multifaceted, continuous, and highly visible. First, there's the relentless military pressure. We've seen ongoing large-scale military exercises like the significant encirclement and blockade simulation conducted around Taiwan in 2024. These aren't just one-off drills.
This is constant practice.
Right. The reports describe this as C, meaning continuous encirclement, which is essentially a real-time sustained practice for a potential blockade and eventual invasion. They're even employing that warm water war or boiling frog approach again.
The boiling frog returns.
Slowly taking outer islands or establishing de facto control over surrounding waters. The concern highlighted is that Taiwan often fails to acknowledge or react appropriately to these incremental encroachments, allowing the boiling to continue.
Until it's too late.
Until it's too late. Second, information warfare is a massive component of their strategy, operating 24/7.
The cyber front.
Absolutely. They're constantly shaping the narrative through state propaganda, promoting the idea of just unification and amplifying pro-China voices both internally and abroad. The goal here is deeply psychological. To specifically erode Taiwan's internal will to resist, to make their population feel that resistance is futile and that unification is inevitable and even beneficial. It's a battle for hearts and minds, not just territory.
Happening constantly.
Every single day across traditional media, social media, and even through cultural exchanges. And third, there are very real concerns about gradual occupation as a strategic prelude. The analyses even mention predictions of gradual occupation of specific outer islands, like Kinmen and Matsu, to.
The ones right off the coast.
Right, which are geographically very close to mainland China as a precursor to a full invasion of the main island. Some geopolitical analysis specifically points to 2027 as a potentially high-risk period for significant cross-strait conflict.
2027.
Indicating a perceived timeline for these escalating actions. It's not just a distant threat, it's something being actively prepared for, both militarily and psychologically, with a clear blueprint of incremental steps.
So China constructs this elaborate justification, painting themselves as the aggrieved party defending their unity, and then they back it up with relentless military and information pressure. But what's the real end goal beyond just drawing lines on a map? What do they truly want with Taiwan and its people? Because it sounds like it goes much deeper than simply acquiring territory.
You've hit on the crucial point, because it absolutely does go deeper. The core intent has never changed, regardless of how they dress it up with terms like peaceful unification, one country, two systems, blood is thicker than water, the 9-2 consensus, compatriot integration, national rejuvenation, or preventing external interference.
Lots of slogans.
Lots of slogans. But the ultimate unwavering goal, as the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, itself has stated repeatedly and unequivocally, is to make Taiwan a part of China, to completely subsume its political system, force it to recognize the legitimacy of the CCP, and ensure it obeys Beijing's central directives.
The total control.
Total control. This isn't speculation. It's their publicly declared objective.
So it's not just a matter of sovereignty. It's a fundamental change in how an entire society functions, from its government to its everyday life. Let's talk about these language games the CCP plays. They use terms like one country, two systems, which is supposed to sound flexible and appealing, offering a high degree of autonomy. But Hong Kong, as we've witnessed, serves as a pretty stark, living, breathing case study, doesn't it, of what that truly means in practice.
Oh, absolutely. What's fascinating and so revealing here is how one country, two systems is initially presented. It's designed to sound like a flexible, accommodating solution, a way for Taiwan to maintain its vibrant way of life while being politically integrated with China. But as you rightly point out, Hong Kong, tragically, serves as the most powerful and undeniable case study of what that truly means in practice, after the widespread pro-democracy protests in 2019.
Which everyone watched unfold.
Everyone watched. The promise of high autonomy was systematically and completely revoked. The draconian national security law was implemented, dissidents were systematically purged, prominent pro-democracy figures were arrested or forced into exile, and press freedom was essentially destroyed. Hong Kong, which was once a beacon of semi-autonomy and was supposed to be the shining model for Taiwan, instead became a stark cautionary tale.
Demonstrating that two systems always yield to one country.
Precisely. It showed that two systems eventually bows to one country under the CCP.
So, if Taiwan were to accept that model, the analyses suggest the outcome is almost depressingly predictable. It's like being promised you can live in a beautiful, fancy apartment with all your freedoms. But then, slowly but surely, they start taking away your keys, changing the locks, telling you what music you can listen to, dictating your guest list, and eventually you realize you're trapped in an apartment that looks nice from the outside, but isn't yours anymore, with no control over your own life.
Exactly that, and the analogy perfectly captures the creeping loss of autonomy. Then there's this phrase that Beijing frequently uses: anti-Taiwan independence, not anti-Taiwan.
Yeah, okay, that sounds tricky.
It sounds benevolent on the surface, doesn't it? As if they're saying we don't have a problem with Taiwanese people or their culture, just with Taiwan independence advocates. But it's deeply cynical and manipulative. It essentially means you can be Taiwanese, you can like your local culture, you can speak your dialect, but you absolutely fundamentally cannot say you are not Chinese.
Ah, there's the catch.
There's the catch. Once you reject a Chinese identity, once you assert a distinct, independent Taiwanese identity or advocate for self-determination, that's immediately equated to Taiwan independence, which then becomes their convenient justification for attack or unification by force.
It's a linguistic trap.
It really is, designed to delegitimize any form of self-rule. And finally, encompassing all of this, there's the overarching powerful narrative of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The CCP declares that without unifying Taiwan, there is no rejuvenation.
Linking it directly to their national destiny.
Directly. This elevates unification from a mere policy goal to an indispensable, almost sacred component of their entire national project. It positions unification as the final battle in their historical narrative, a mission that is beyond question, beyond debate, and certainly beyond retreat. state. It's framed as an essential, non-negotiable step for their vision of national greatness and historical destiny. It's not just about territory, it's about their very identity and perceived place in the world.
So it's clearly not just about taking territory on a map. China wants to rewrite Taiwan's very identity and its fundamental way of life. It's not just about the land, it's about their thoughts, their beliefs, their culture, their democratic values.
Precise.
It sounds like an attempt at total societal transformation, a complete re-engineering of an entire people.
Precisely. The reports we've seen highlight that China aims to transform Taiwan's very essence, a process they informally refer to as sinicizing it. Let's look at what that entails across different crucial aspects of life in Taiwan. In education, they would aim to systematically replace Taiwan's vibrant democratic history and local identity with Chinese history and motherland narratives.
Rewriting history.
Imagine your kids suddenly learning a completely different, state-approved version of their own country's past, effectively erasing their unique identity. For media, it means a drastic shift from Taiwan's diverse and free media landscape.
Which is very lively now.
Very lively, where robust debate and criticism are common, to a government-controlled, heavily censored information environment where news is tightly managed to exclusively serve the party's agenda. Independent journalism would cease to exist. When it comes to religion, it would move from the free worship currently enjoyed in Taiwan to systems where religions must be registered and strictly controlled by the state, much like they are in mainland China.
Limiting freedom of belief.
Right, limiting or outright suppressing practices deemed unpatriotic or a challenge to party authority. In law, it means completely supplanting Taiwan's constitutional and judicial independence with a system where the Communist Party is above the law.
Party over law.
Yes, and the national security law takes absolute precedence, systematically eroding fundamental human rights and due process. And for speech, perhaps most chillingly, it means eradicating the freedom to criticize the president or political parties, instead enforcing a strict ban on criticizing the Communist Party.
Silencing all dissent.
Effectively silencing all forms of dissent and independent thought. This is emphatically not what anyone would describe as peaceful integration. It's explicitly described in the analyses as a civilizational and systemic colonial transformation.
Wow, colonial transformation.
It's a complete overhaul of how a society functions, thinks, and relates to its own history and future. A truly totalitarian reimagining.
That's a chilling level of ambition and detail. It's not just about flags and borders, but about deep cultural and ideological control, a complete transformation of identity. Given this aggressive, multi-pronged ambition, can Taiwan really harden up and resist? Or are they, as we discussed earlier, destined to be a frog in a slowly boiling pot? What undeniable evidence do we have of this unveiled ambition that makes it so clear?
Well, the evidence, unfortunately, is quite clear and has been on display for years, not hidden behind closed doors. First, let's revisit the Anti-Secession Law of 2005.
The law again.
This law, publicly enacted, explicitly states that if Taiwan moves towards independence and China deems the time ripe, they can use force. It's not a secret clause, it's published legislation. It is quite literally the only law in the world that explicitly says we have the right to attack you if you take certain sovereign actions.
Like a referendum.
Like holding a referendum on independence, exactly. That is a direct, undeniable declaration of aggressive intent, codified into their legal system.
And the daily military harassment, it's not just random sporadic incursions, is it? It seems to be part of a much larger sustained pattern.
No, it's absolutely not random. It's a calculated, constant pressure campaign. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, almost daily harasses Taiwan, with military aircraft routinely entering Taiwan's air defense identification zone and naval vessels appearing along Taiwan's southeastern defense line.
Constant probing.
These aren't just occasional drills. These are frequent, systematic encirclement tactics that have become a regular occurrence. This serves multiple purposes. It's psychological warfare.
Wearing them down.
Designed to wear down Taiwan's will to resist and normalize Beijing's presence around the island. It's attrition warfare, exhausting Taiwan's defensive resources as they must constantly scramble to respond. It's cognitive warfare, spreading fear and helplessness within the population.
And it's practice.
And critically, it's direct preparation for actual conflict, allowing the PLA to map out Taiwan's responses and test their own readiness. It's continuous, low-level conflict designed to soften the target. Finally, and perhaps most insidiously, there's the critical internal aspect within China. Domestic brainwashing.
The internal propaganda.
Yes. China's education system, from kindergarten through university, constantly indoctrinates its 1.4 billion people with the unwavering belief that Taiwan is part of the motherland and will eventually return. This narrative is pervasive, reinforced across all state-controlled media, propaganda, and social structures. When an entire populace from childhood is fed this belief and it's reinforced across all facets of society, it ceases to be just a government fantasy.
It becomes a national conviction.
It becomes a shared, deeply ingrained national conviction. This creates what the analyses term a cognitive accomplice structure, where the vast majority of the Chinese population genuinely believes in the righteousness of unification, by force if necessary.
Making it harder to deter.
Exactly. This makes the CCP's intentions incredibly difficult to deter, as it has deep societal roots and widespread popular support for the goal, regardless of the means.
So it's not just about flags and borders, but about deep cultural and ideological control, a complete transformation of identity backed by legal frameworks, constant military pressure, and an internally unified public. Given this aggressive, multi-pronged ambition, can Taiwan really harden up and resist, or are they, as we discussed earlier, destined to be a frog in a slowly boiling pot, paralyzed by internal divisions and external pressures?
Right. So we've talked extensively about the dilemma of Taiwan's passive stance and China's relentless ambition to not just seize land, but to fundamentally transform an entire culture and way of life. Now we arrive at the million-dollar question. Can Taiwan, when push comes to shove, really harden up and fight for its existence, for its very identity and democratic future? Do they possess a profound resistance gene buried deep in their collective DNA?
The resistance gene, I like that. Is it there?
Well, the analysis suggests a definite historical potential for resistance. Taiwan has indeed shown a powerful resistance gene in the past, proving they're not inherently passive when truly pushed to the brink. We see powerful echoes of this in the 228 incident in 1947 and the subsequent decades of the White Terror period.
Dark times.
Very dark times. During these periods, despite brutal oppression, widespread massacres, and severe crackdowns by the ruling Kuomintang, many Taiwanese citizens chose to resist, often at great personal cost, quietly planting the seeds for the eventual democratic transition that Taiwan enjoys today. It demonstrated a deep-seated desire for self-determination and an unwillingness to be ruled by external forces.
And more recently?
More recently, we saw this capacity for collective action and defiance in modern movements like the 2014 Sunflower Movement. This was a pivotal moment when students occupied the legislature for weeks to vehemently oppose a trade pact with China.
I remember that.
That was widely seen as a form of economic infiltration, giving Beijing too much leverage over Taiwan's economy and political future. It was a powerful collective rejection of China's growing influence. And after the harrowing 2019 Hong Kong anti-extradition protests, where Hong Kongers bravely fought for their freedoms against Beijing's tightening grip.
A real wake-up call.
A huge wake-up call. Taiwanese public sympathy surged dramatically, and disillusionment with the one country, two systems model, once heavily proposed for Taiwan, reached its absolute peak. These events solidified a widespread understanding of the fate that could await Taiwan if it didn't stand firm.
So history shows they can mobilize.
These historical and modern events collectively illustrate that Taiwanese society, when faced with existential threats or the clear erosion of its core values and democratic way of life, does have a profound potential for explosion, a latent capacity to fight back and defend its way of life. It is certainly not a docile society by any means.
That's incredibly encouraging. The spirit is clearly there, a real fire in their belly forged from historical experience. But what about the practical reality? Are people actually ready to put boots on the ground, literally? Or is it more of a moral stance, a willingness in principle rather than in practice?
And this raises a profoundly important question, the often overlooked gap between willingness and readiness. Surveys by various Taiwanese institutions and international think tanks like the Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation consistently show a high willingness to defend.
The polls look good on paper.
Right. Over 65–70% of the public express a willingness to fight for Taiwan's defense, which is a significant number in any democracy. And even more strikingly, over 80% explicitly oppose accepting one country, two systems. This is further reinforced by polls showing a deeply ingrained Taiwanese identity, for example, a remarkable 67% identifying exclusively as Taiwanese, and only a tiny 2.4% identifying as Chinese in 2024.
Wow, that identity number is stark.
It is. And Pew Research data shows 68% favorable views of the U.S. compared to only 35% for China, indicating a broad societal preference for alignment with democratic nations and a firm stance against Beijing. However, and this is the big however, the proportion of the population actually prepared for combat or having received sufficient practical military training remains quite low, especially among younger generations.
The readiness gap.
Exactly. It's like saying, I'm willing to defend my home with all my heart and soul, but I really hope the fight doesn't come to my living room, and I haven't exactly practiced for it in a while. There's a significant, acknowledged gap between that declared willingness and practical ability, partly due to a long-standing weak defense education and preparedness system.
So they need more training, more drills.
Much more to bridge that gap. This disconnect is a major vulnerability.
So there's an internal battle as well, not just the external threat. The analyses frequently mention pro-CCP forces within Taiwan. What kind of impact do they have? Are they a significant obstacle or more of a fringe element that can be managed?
This is arguably Taiwan's biggest internal variable, and it's quite complex and deeply embedded. You have political parties like the Kuomintang, the KMT.
We mentioned them earlier.
Right. Which has elements that openly advocate for peace above all, sometimes even opposing critical military purchases from the U.S. or questioning the wisdom of receiving U.S. assistance. Some prominent figures? Well, they've even echoed Chinese narratives, telling Taiwanese people, don't be a pawn of the U.S.
Which sounds just like Beijing's talking points.
Eerily similar, this creates significant internal division and skepticism about defense efforts, making national unity harder to achieve. Then there's the relentless media and information warfare that China actively conducts. They strategically use certain media outlets in Taiwan.
The info war again?
And vast social media armies to spread narratives designed to demoralize the Taiwanese public. They constantly push messages like Taiwan can't win, war is hopeless, and relying on the U.S. is useless, all aimed at cultivating a deep sense of fear, helplessness, and ultimately surrender.
Trying to break their will.
Exactly. Major tech companies like Meta, Facebook, and Google have repeatedly exposed large-scale cognitive warfare and disinformation campaigns specifically targeting Taiwan, showing just how pervasive and sophisticated this effort is. And this leads to a particularly dangerous blurring of lines between genuine pacifism and what can subtly become surrenderism.
Explain that distinction.
Well, many pro-China arguments masquerade as pacifism, saying, I don't want to fight, which is a universally understandable human sentiment. But subtly, these arguments convey a more insidious message. If you don't resist, there won't be a fight, so just give in. This seemingly peaceful rhetoric can actually paralyze Taiwan, leading to hesitation, division, and fatal indecision during a crisis.
Causing them to miss crucial moments to resist.
Precisely. It's a form of internal sabotage of national will.
That's incredibly insightful. So it's not just about military might, it's fundamentally about the will to fight and the ability to act decisively as a society. It's like a soccer team that says they love the team and they're willing to win. But when the game starts, some want to play, some want to sit on the bench, and some might even pass the ball to the other team.
That's a perfect analogy for the challenge they face.
So what are the ultimate conditions then for Taiwan to truly harden up when it matters most?
That's a perfect analogy. The ability for Taiwan to harden up and effectively resist an encroachment or invasion ultimately depends on three key factors, each with its own probability of success based on current assessments. First, government leadership will. Will the leaders dare to make the decisive, immediate call to mobilize defense and, crucially, effectively neutralize or clear out any internal pro-China elements that could paralyze efforts at a critical juncture?
The political will question.
Exactly. The probability for this is assessed as medium-high, heavily dependent on the attitudes of the presidential office and key military figures at the moment of crisis. The political will to act decisively is paramount. Second, people's unity and mobilization. Can the public truly trust each other amidst the immense uncertainty and fear of war and genuinely mobilize for collective defense, even if it means personal sacrifice?
Societal cohesion.
Yes. The probability here is assessed as medium. This would require much more widespread defense training and drills across the civilian population than currently exists, fostering that deep collective trust, resilience, and practical readiness. And third, suppression of pro-CCP forces. Can the insidious influence of pro-China politicians, media outlets, and disinformation campaigns be limited at crucial moments to prevent the paralysis of national will?
Countering the internal threat.
Right. This is assessed as low, primarily due to Taiwan's robust democratic freedoms, including freedom of speech and the severe extent of China's infiltration and sophisticated disinformation campaigns. Countering this without impinging on democratic principles is an ongoing, immense challenge.
So that's the weakest link, potentially.
Potentially, yes. Despite these significant challenges and complex internal obstacles, it's also crucial to remember that Taiwan does possess significant inherent military strength. It's consistently ranked as a formidable fighting force, for instance, placing 22nd globally in 2025 by some defense analyses, with 215,000 active personnel and a massive 2.3 million reservists.
That's a lot of people.
It is. Coupled with substantial U.S. military support through ongoing arms sales and increasing international focus on its security, these factors do increase Taiwan's potential to harden up and mount a credible defense when it truly matters. It's a complex dynamic with a lot of moving parts, but the capacity for resilience is undeniably there.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, as you navigate the news and discussions around this critical global hotspot? We've really unpacked the layers of this incredibly complex situation. From Taiwan's profound internal dilemmas and the United States' strategic tightrope walk, to China's multifaceted long-term ambitions to not just seize land, but to fundamentally transform an entire culture and a way of life.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It's a geopolitical chess match, playing out in slow motion with incredibly high stakes for global stability, trade, and the very concept of self-determination.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the analyses highlight a stark and unavoidable choice for Taiwan. A choice between strategic passivity, which risks gradual absorption through those boiling frog tactics,
Low squeeze.
or actively defining clearer red lines for self-defense, even if it means taking the initiative in a limited defensive way against incremental encroachments. It's about maintaining agency and self-determination in a highly dangerous geopolitical environment. The insights point to a scenario where Taiwan's internal cohesion, its collective will, and its proactive self-defense mechanisms will be as crucial, if not more so, than any external assistance it might receive.
So the internal battle is key.
The battle for Taiwan is as much a battle for its soul as it is for its territory.
That's it. It's a high-stakes poker game where one side, China, is playing with a very long game in mind, trying to avoid any overt first shots to complicate international responses and justify intervention. The question for Taiwan, and indeed for the world watching, becomes, at what point does standing firm, defining clear defensive boundaries, and potentially countering gray zone tactics become an act of self-preservation, rather than a provocation that escalates conflict?
A very difficult question.
And how does a society balance its deep desire for peace with the imperative to defend its very identity, its democratic way of life, and its future against the slow, creeping transformation?
It truly challenges us to rethink how nations define war and peace in an era dominated by these gray zone tactics. What does it truly take for a society to harden up and rally when the threat isn't an overt, full-scale invasion with bombs falling, but a slow, creeping, incremental transformation that aims to rewrite your very essence, erase your history, and subsume your freedom one step at a time?
A sobering thought to end on. And that wraps up another fascinating Sip and Talk. We truly hope this deep dive into the Taiwan Strait gave you some incredible insights, provoked some new thoughts, and helped clarify a truly complex geopolitical situation.
Yeah, hopefully helpful.
We love bringing you these big topics, simplifying them, and maybe even making you chuckle a bit along the way.
We certainly try. So if you enjoyed this discussion, please hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else. And please do us a huge favor and check out our good old friend Micky's YouTube channel. He's got some hilarious memes, awesome music, great wine tasting sessions, and cool travel vlogs.
He does have good stuff.
Honestly, we work so hard promoting him, he'd better send us some more interesting material and data next time, right?
Absolutely. Micky, you hear that? Keep them coming. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and keep sipping.
He definitely owes us big time. Thanks for joining us on Sip and Talk, and we'll catch you next time.